Good morning. My name is Jessica Brown. I'm a marketing manager here at Communispond, and I will be your host today. We are recording today's session, and following the conclusion of the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to the recording and also the slides. We will be projecting our webcams, and if you see our streaming webcams currently, or if you don't see them, just expand the Participants tab in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We are very interested in your questions. There is a Q&A icon in the upper right portion of your screen, so please select that icon to submit your questions throughout the webinar. We'll answer as many as we can towards the end. At the end of today's session, we'll be drawing names for our prizes. We'll be giving away an Android tablet and also 2 gift certificates, each good for a seat in one of Communispond's public seminars of executive presentation skills. The gift certificate can also be used as a $1,550 credit towards a corporate program. For those of you who are new to Communispond, Communispond has been a leader in professional skills training for 47 years. Communispond offers solutions in 5 core competencies: communication performance solutions, leadership skills, sales performance solutions, executive communications coaching, and business skills solutions. And Communispond also has a strong global presence with over 13 offices worldwide, 75 global faculty, and delivering programs in over 19 different languages. Now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Wayne Turmel. Wayne is a longtime Communispond faculty member and an expert in communication and presentation skills, particularly as they apply to the online world. He's the author of several books on the subject, including 10 Steps to Successful Virtual Presentations and Meet Like You Mean It. We'll actually be giving away 2 copies of Meet Like You Mean It at the end of today's webinar also. Wayne, I would like to now turn the podium over to you.
Oh, good heavens. Well, thank you so much. If you would make me the presenter, that would be truly lovely. And thank you, everybody. Welcome from a kind of rainy and nasty Chicago. Lovely to have you with us. I'm glad you're here. This topic is really near and dear to me. After teaching communication skills for almost 20 years, it has become apparent that we're in a whole new world of presenting, and very few people, and I'll share some statistics in a minute about how few people actually have been prepared for the way that we have to function today, whether we're salespeople or trainers. So I'm very excited about today's topic, something I've been geeking out about for quite some time. First, though, I'd like to learn about you so that I can tailor and focus today's comments. And so if you thought you could just go answer your email, you're wrong. I've got a couple of questions for you. The first is, have you ever presented online? And there are a couple of options here. The first is yes, and I had to run the technology and the whole darn thing. Yes, I've presented, but somebody else drove. Not yet, but it's coming, or I don't have any plans to do it. Basically, you can't make me la la la, I'm not listening to you. So we're going to give you a few seconds to answer the question and remind you, if you have questions, you can use the Q&A box. If you're having trouble with the audio, try going to the communicate box in the upper left and making sure that you've got the right speaker and microphone. Sometimes if you've got a headset, that can get kind of thrown off. So we're going to close the poll. It's going to take a few seconds to do that. And it's going to take about 8 seconds for the screen to show the results. But I will tell you that this has changed a lot, not surprisingly, over the last couple of years. More and more of us have, had to kind of make peace with presenting online. And so you can see that about half of you have done it and driven the technology. I'm still surprised by the number of people who haven't presented online yet. And so far, only one of you are living in denial and think that it's not going to happen. So that's interesting. I want to know something else, though, and this is an important question. And that is, how do you feel about presenting online? Do you love it? Have you kind of made peace with it? It's okay. You're not crazy about it, or you'd rather poke your eyes out with a sharp stick. Go ahead very quickly. If you would make the appropriate response, we can get on with the presentation. And this is kind of interesting to me. We're going to see the results in a moment. Remember that over half of you have presented, and another 10% or so have presented with somebody else driving. So, that's a lot of people who have, in fact, used the technology in the past. However, as we see here, only 12% of you say that you love it. The rest of us have kind of either made peace with it or, frankly, we're not crazy about it. And so one of the things we're going to discuss today is why that is. Why do people who are good presenters in so many ways suddenly struggle? Now, if you'd like, you can close the polling tab so that it's not taking up space on your screen. And here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about why is presenting online different? What is it about this medium that throws us off? Interestingly, there's a lot that hasn't changed in 2,000 years. A lot of what we know about communicating has remained very, very much the same as it's always been, and we forget that at our peril. And hopefully throughout the day, you're going to pick up tips for engaging and keeping your audience interested and being more effective as an online presenter and helping those that you're responsible for developing, for those of you in the training business. All right. So why is presenting online different? Well, there are basically three reasons, one of which is extremely obvious, and that's the technology. It's the bane of some of our existence. We're not necessarily comfortable with it. You don't get feedback from the audience, or at least you don't get it in the unconscious way that we're used to it. And this is important when you're planning a presentation. And frankly, as a presenter, there's an energy drain. You wouldn't think that that would be the case since we're not physically standing and presenting in front of a group, but actually presenting online can be more draining. And so let's take a closer look at each of these as we go. So if we think about doing stand-up presentations, whether it's a sales call, whether it's a training, whatever we're doing, it's pretty simple. We've gotten pretty used to it. We plug our computer or our device into a monitor or a projector and we're ready to go. All you got to do is kind of click through the slides. But when you're on a web platform, there's a lot more to it. And frankly, it doesn't matter which platform you're using. There are 127 out there, and the rules are pretty much exactly the same. Unless you have a technical assistant, and some of you have presented with somebody else taking care of the technology, think about everything that you have to do. You have to advance the slides. You need to annotate, as I've done with the arrow and different things. You have to monitor the Q&A or the chat. There's a whole lot going on. You need to watch whether or not you're making eye contact with your audience if you've got your webcam going. You also have to remember to move a little bit slower. Audiences don't follow as quickly online. There's lag time between what you're seeing on your screen as the presenter, sometimes what the audience sees. There's a lot going on, okay? And there's the ever-present concern, of course, that the internet could go down on you at any time, and that certainly has happened to all of us. In terms of audience feedback, it's amazing what a difference it makes. If you are presenting live, you get a ton of feedback from the audience. You can hear them laughing at your jokes. More importantly, we get a ton of visual input. They're smiling, they're nodding, they're crossing their arms, they're looking confused. And that's telling you some things about how to adjust your presentation, how it's going, things like that. Presenting online very often feels like it's talking to the void because we're not getting that feedback. And without that feedback, we don't know, are they following us? Are they getting it? Are we speaking too quickly? Are we boring them? We don't know. And so we have to find ways in the online environment to get that feedback in different ways. And the higher stakes, the audience, for example, a training, a collaborative meeting, things like that, feedback is critical. In something like this, which is a webinar, it's a one-to-many event, we've got a large audience, kind of the equivalent of giving a lecture at a conference. It's a little bit different, but we'll talk about some techniques for getting audience feedback in a bit. But that lack of audience is one reason why we kind of freak out a little. And it impacts our energy. A lot of people think that presenting online is really for techies, people who love technology. And I'm here to tell you it's not true, because I hate technology. If I had my druthers, I'd just be standing by a campfire in a cave somewhere and talking to you all. But the fact of the matter is the way that we work today requires us to use these tools. And since I want to be employed and my job is to help others stay employed, we've learned to make peace with it. You can either accept that this technology is here and leverage it, or fight it. And I've decided to leverage it. But just because something is available doesn't mean we take to it naturally. And so, it takes practice. And here's a stunning statistic to me. And remember, this number is from the platform providers like WebEx and GoToMeeting and Skype for Business. So I suspect that it's even worse than they say. They will tell you that somewhere upwards of 85% of people present using these tools for the first time with innocent victims on the other end. In other words, they get no training, no coaching, no rehearsal. It's here's your WebEx license. Try not to hurt somebody. And it's like learning to drive by taking your parents to the airport. It's doable, but it's not going to be a lot of fun, and nobody's going to be in a hurry to repeat the experience. So the fact is that psychologically we're stressed out, we're not getting energy back from our audience, and so it drains us as presenters, and that can frequently result in us not being as energetic or interesting, or our voice being as modulated as perhaps we know it should be. Now, you might, for those of you that have presented online, you may feel all of this instinctively. It's kind of a comfort, at least it was to me, to know that in fact, the technology is something that we can't do anything about. It's a little bit, here's why presenting with technology freaks us out. You ever been driving late at night and it's pouring down rain and you're trying to find an address, so you have to turn down the radio so you can see better? That's what it's like presenting online, at least at the beginning, until you get used to it. So the technology does freak us out. And when I say freak us out, I mean literally, psychologically, biochemically freaks us out. What we're looking at in this picture is an MRI of a brain under stress. And so you can see when we're under stress, all these bright areas are basically firing in red alert. When we're presenting and we're stressed, and remember, presenting is the #1 fear of most people to start with. So, our amygdala, which is our fight or flight mechanism, it starts firing out danger signals. All the things that we do unconsciously when we present, we watch for reactions, we remember to check in with our audience, we stop and take questions as we go. All of that goes out the window, right? We're freaking out. We just want to present and get it over with as quickly as possible and use as little of the technology, because that's stressing us out, as possible. And so what happens is it makes for not great presentations, and even good presenters, and I would say especially good presenters, struggle with this. What happens, of course, is that when we're under stress, we revert to what is charmingly known as our reptilian brain. All of that lovely, highly developed frontal cortex, millions of years of evolution stuff pretty much goes out the window. All we can think about is, let's get this over with, let's make this as painless as possible, let's limit the amount of things that are stressing us. And so it reduces our options, it limits our ability to multitask, and fight or flight kicks in. And even if we have kind of conquered that fight or flight mechanism in face-to-face presentations, this is a different animal. And when you add the level of complexity that technology creates, it's the fight or flight mechanism, and experienced presenters are really unfamiliar with that. And so we freak out even harder. The bad news, well, the good news is that you can actually calm that. With practice and repetition, your brain stops freaking out. It becomes muscle memory, and you can be exactly as effective online as you can at the front of the room. The bad news is that you can't develop that unless you practice and repeat and practice and repeat. So let me give you an example of how this works in the real world. And again, because we are one to a whole bunch of people, I don't consider this training. But imagine that you're in a traditional training class. You're in a Communispond class. There's 15 people or so there, and someone's running the class or running the meeting, and that person says to the group, okay, listen up. I'm going to talk for about the next 45 minutes or an hour. I don't want you to speak to me. I don't want you to speak to each other. I want you to hold all your questions till the end. By the way, I'm not even going to look at you. I'm probably going to just talk to my slides. How well do you think that presentation would go over? And the answer, as we know, is not very. You know, those of us who are training professionals are probably freaking out and saying, well, that's the worst possible way to teach anything. Now I want you to go back to how most online presentations are run. Again, webinars are a little bit different because it's more like a lecture, but limiting interaction, not engaging the audience, doing data dumps is exactly the wrong thing for things like training and sales demos and the like. But it's what most online presenters, especially rookies, do because it's easier on us as the presenter. We all recognize that a live presenter needs to get interaction, right? We need to be able to gauge our audience. We need to be able to know what's going on. An online presenter needs to do the same thing, and we need to use the platform in order to do that. Now, you'll notice that we have the Q&A open, so you know, you can get your questions in queue. That's really important. Jessica's monitoring that. We've used the polling to kind of engage you and bring you in, but even that is a function of the size of the audience. Interaction tells you whether or not your audience is engaged and following. It helps the audience stay alert and focus on what the presenter is saying. Most people use fewer than a quarter of the tools available. In classes, for example, at Communispond, classes that I've been teaching online for years, we use tools like the whiteboard, the chat, the hands up feature, voting, annotation tools. There's a ton of ways that you can engage with your audience. In small groups, you leave the phone lines open rather than mute everybody so that people can engage as they would in a classroom. That's really important, but we as presenters need to understand the tools that are available to do an effective online presentation. And because most of us have never seen an online presentation that uses all those tools in context, we're either unfamiliar with them or unfamiliar enough that we don't want to risk using them during our presentation, and that creates some problems. So it sounds like with technology, everything has changed and it's a brand new world and everything is different and everything that we've learned is wrong, and that's wrong. Because what hasn't changed? Well, 3,000 years ago, Demosthenes, Socrates, Aristotle, and the like really created the basis of public speaking and rhetoric. The rules that they created remain exactly the same. Argument, believe it or not, arguing and making your case in court was actually an Olympic sport during the first Olympics. Debate was considered a sport. It's really quite cool. But here's ultimately what hasn't changed is you are trying to communicate with your audience, and whether it's WebEx or Skype or whatever you're using, the elements of good communication haven't changed. your message still needs to be clear. You need to engage your audience, and you need to deliver effectively. So, you need to do all of those things, plus, oh yeah, push the right button. So if it seems like online presenting is more complicated, it might be, but it's not necessarily more difficult, it's just different. So let's look at each of these. The most important thing is that your audience needs to be clear about what you're telling them. That means that they need to understand your purpose. If they need to ask questions and interact with you, they should be able to do this. You need to make sure that your purpose is clear. You need to remove distractions and help them see what's going on. Every one of you, and I can tell, by the way, that some of you are looking at other things while this is going on, but the fact is everybody online has a short attention span. So you need to remove distractions. Things that work well live, long stories, cute anecdotes, exercises that work great in the classroom, they don't always work in an online environment. You need to get to the point quickly, and you need to not clutter things up by giving people more than they can handle. The number one complaint about sales demos, for example, is too much information. So here's a good tip. If you are presenting online and you find yourself saying, oh, by the way, it means that you're probably adding more information than people can physically process. I've actually got, right here, a pretty detailed outline of each of the slides of this presentation, and it keeps me from going too far into the weeds. If left to my own devices, you're shocked to discover I just fall in love with my own voice and keep talking. But the fact of the matter is that online, more is not more. And then finally, you don't want to create a visual disconnect for your audience. So if they see it on the screen, you say it. And we're going to go into more depth on that in a moment. In terms of engagement, it's really critical that your visuals support the message clearly and succinctly. Your visuals need to be clean and lean so that they draw the audience in, but they don't distract from your message. You need to do what we call clearing the slides, and what that means is help the audience by eliminating and helping them focus. So if you've got a chart, for example, with a lot of information on it, your audience sees that chart and they start trying to interpret it. You want to draw their attention as quickly as possible to the area that you want them to focus on, to the vital information. This might mean that rather than use a single visual, you want to use more slides in an online presentation so that each visual only shows the thing that you're talking about at that moment. And of course, one way to help with that is to use annotation tools, as I've been doing. And the reason that this is engaging is that people are visual creatures. And when something visual happens on the screen, we tend to re-engage. If we're looking at the same visual for a long time, our natural instinct is for our brain to go, okay, I get this, move on. And if your audience is wandering off, answering email, doing all that, it's because you're not engaging them, and visually engaging them is certainly one way to do that. Now, interestingly, a lot of people, particularly good presenters, forget everything they know about presentation skills when they get online. They think that it doesn't matter anymore. But the fact is that the way we deliver our message, being inclusive, being conversational, avoiding reading, all of those things are really, really important. You want your audience to be inclusive. The more impersonal the language that you use, the more that the audience will tap out. And so it's important, for example, and this is a really simple thing, most of the people on this call are engaged in some form of training function. So those are the examples that I tend to be using. Why? Because they're relevant to you. Using you and we rather than I, me, in general, one is prone to, creates a a connection with your audience. It also helps that you're conversational and personal. Now, the webcam certainly helps with this, and it keeps me cognizant of things like my gestures and my energy and making what passes for eye contact with you all. But there's a tendency for presenters online to become very formal. I am now a presenter. And we're more worried about making sure that the presentation goes well than we're really communicating. And one way that we do this is we tend to have scripts that we follow. I've got certainly an outline, a leader's guide for this presentation, but you don't want to read your script word for word. This means you need to rehearse. And a simple tip is to make sure that you're using bullet points and white space so that you're aware of what you want to say, but you're not reading it word for word. And I hope that as we get questions in queue that we're getting lots of questions and we can drill down into the weeds of some of this in just a little bit. The vocal energy, we've all seen the studies about how much of our presentation is visual and vocal, and that is still true to a degree, but online, particularly with large webinars or with conference calls, things like that, vocal energy is critical. Your pace and inflection, your volume, the speed, all of those things are critical because it's physically harder to maintain focus. Once our eyes see what's on the screen, we're now relying on our ears for most of the information. And the fact is that this tends to mean that we're more involved with our audio than we would normally be. Prime example is pace and inflection. You need to slow down. People have a harder time listening in a primarily auditory environment. More than that, if I'm in the room and I get on one of my rolls and I start speaking really quickly, I can see it in your eyes, right? I can see your eyes glaze over. I can see you start to get confused. I can see that I lost you on a corner somewhere. Online, you need to slow down and you need to vary your inflection. If you sound like you're reading, if you sound bored, if you sound like you're so focused that it's not really communicating to your audience, it's going to make it physically harder for your audience to stay engaged. Now, I know we're looking at a speedometer here. I use this as a reminder to myself. When you are presenting online, from time to time, I want you to pause, picture the speedometer. How fast do you think you're going? And take it down at least 5 miles an hour. And I do that periodically whenever I pause, whenever I stop. I like to kind of do a quick check and think about how am I doing. Volume is really important, and it's important for a couple of reasons. First of all, people need to hear you. So you'll notice that we're suggesting that you use a headset. I never, ever, ever present a class or anything important without a headset, whether it's on my phone or on the computer. And the reason is this. I tend to move around a lot when I present. If you're using a speakerphone, your voice comes and goes away from the source of the sound, and that can create too much modulation in the volume, which makes it hard for your audience to connect. If you're on one of those meetings where you've got a bunch of people on a speakerphone, if they can't hear you, you can't contribute effectively. So I really urge you to use a headset even when you are using your computer or whatever. Now, one thing about the volume is if it's hard for your audience to hear, it's hard for them to stay connected. And on the subject of connection, pauses in any presentation are really critical, but online they're important and they need to be built into your script because time is relative. Now, what do I mean by that? We hear all the time about dead air, and there's a thing when you're presenting that you're so worried about silence that our natural instinct is to fill it in. But in fact, your audience needs pauses. It allows them to process what you've just said. It allows them to say, oh, I have a question. I better get that in queue. And we're getting questions in queue, which is great. That's exactly what we want to have happen. But it also allows you as the presenter, when you pause, to recalibrate. Let your brain catch up with your mouth. Regulate how quickly you're speaking. All of those things are important. And so in our script here, we actually have places where it says pause, let them catch up. Pause, remind them to get their questions in queue. And the reason that we have to do that online is because we're not getting the cues from your eyeballs, right? I can't see whether you're smiling and nodding. I can't see if I've lost you. And so in a small class or in a sales demo or something like that, you have to build in those check-ins. If this were a smaller group, I would stop and say, do you have any questions? Or, you know, Tricia, you've got your hand up. Can I answer something for you? Because this is a webinar, I need to be able to build pauses in and allow you to do that. And those pauses feel like they last forever. That's where relativity comes in. Einstein explained relativity. He said that a second with your hand on a hot stove feels like forever. An hour with a pretty girl feels like a second. That's the thing. And so when I pause to ask questions in a virtual class, for example, I will count 5 Mississippis in my head. It feels like a really long time for silence, but it's important to allow your audience to process what you've just said and get ready for the next round. A couple of other tips. Again, you know, this is the equivalent of a conference presentation. And so it's been all me, and that's not ideal. I will tell you that if I were running a virtual meeting or if this were a true training class, that would not be the case. First of all, allowing other people to speak is a great way of engaging people, keeping them involved, making sure that they're paying attention. Also, and this is true, every time the voice changes, people involuntarily reconnect, because no matter how good a presenter you are, after a while, you turn into Charlie Brown's teacher. People think, oh, okay, it's the same person. It's kind of womp, 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 womp. But when you hear a different voice, we automatically go, ooh, something's changed, and we reconnect. So having multiple speakers, stopping and taking questions as you go verbally, allowing people to contribute, all of those things not only make for a better learning experience, which we all know, but from a purely selfish, are they listening, are they engaged standpoint, it's the best way that we have of making sure that people are tracking. And then if you've been looking on the webcam, you may have noticed that as a presenter, even though I'm online, even though I'm not at the front of the room, I still gesture, I still move my body. Even though I'm seated, I'm sitting up straight, I'm projecting, because those things help your voice communicate what you need to communicate. Let those hands go. Now, for me, I'm French Canadian, it's genetic. We talk with our hands anyway, but it's really important, and that's another reason to use a headset, so that your hands are free, because that helps you be more energetic as a presenter, be more engaging, and frankly, more interesting and easy to listen to. Okay, so one last thing that I want to remind you, and we've got a lot of questions in queue, and I want to make sure we get to them. So let's get to something really important, which is a reason that people freak out when they present online. And we need to remember that nobody is perfect. And just as if we misspeak, see, I just did it. If you misspeak in a presentation, you laugh it off and you roll with it. Because we're already under stress when we present online, we tend to take that way more seriously, and don't. One of the big barriers for online presenters is we're so worried about getting everything right that we put too much pressure on ourselves. And the more pressure we put on ourselves, the more likely we are to make a mistake. The truth of the matter is this: audiences are incredibly forgiving. They will forgive imperfection. They won't forgive having their time wasted. And so as long as you are giving them good information, they're getting a good return on the valuable time that they're investing. It's great. Stay focused on your audience and less about how well you are, quote unquote, presenting. Of course, the good news is the more you present, the more presenting online becomes muscle memory, the more likely you are to be perfect. It's kind of this lovely virtuous cycle. And you'll notice that we've been doing something which isn't always the case with online presentations, and that is it's okay to have fun. Presenting online, just as presenting in a classroom or presenting anywhere else, is not life or death. People are more receptive to your message when they're relaxed, when you look like you're having a good time and they're having fun. So things like using humorous clip art, or putting little jokes in the poll, or allowing your sense of humor to come out, which of course is a whole lot easier to do when you're relaxed and you're feeling pretty good about yourself. The more relaxed you are and the more relaxed they are, the more receptive your audience will be to your message. And so anything that you can do to put the audience at ease. In small classes, I like to greet people as they come in. I like to use the voting, the hands up, the whiteboard. All of that stuff is fun. So we've covered a lot of ground, and of course, as with any webinar or lecture or whatever, it all comes down to so what, Wayne? What are we supposed to do about it? So here's what I would urge you, and this is you as individuals. So I know that a lot of us are here on behalf of our organization. I want you to take that hat off for a moment and put on your presentation hat. I want you to watch other online presenters. What do they do that's effective? Emulate that. What do they do that drives you crazy? Don't do that to an innocent audience. One of the things that's really critical is that we learn our platform. Remember, most people use a very limited amount of the features that are available to them. You can't use a tool effectively if you don't know what all of those features do. And you can't use them really well if you haven't practiced with them. Well, that's where training comes in. And training, as we all know, as adult learning professionals, is seeing a tool used in context, being given some guidance, having a chance to practice and play with it. Remember, over 80% of people never get any training or coaching, and then we're shocked that they don't use the tools effectively. But the biggest thing, and for those of us who are experienced presenters who want to get back to that zone that we get in when we present a class or we get in front of a client and it's really humming, you need to practice, practice, practice. The fact of the matter is that presenting online, just as, I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember when PowerPoint first came in and people lost their minds. You can't expect me to use a computer and talk at the same time. And now we literally don't think about it. Why? Because it's muscle memory. We've gotten used to it. Same thing. And I'm here to tell you, after a good 10 years of specializing in online presentations, I'm here to tell you it takes about half a dozen times. If you want to learn how to use the whiteboard, practice with it half a dozen times. You will be amazed at how quickly it becomes muscle memory. Without that, you're always going to be fighting the voices in your head. As I say, it's going to be like trying to drive in the rain and, having to turn off the radio. So practice, practice, practice. And so finally, I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Jessica. And Communispond actually has some ways to help people develop these skills, don't they, Jessica? Whoop, you're muted, Jess.
Thank you, Wayne.
There you go.
All right, and I will be good. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so Communispond offers a program called Virtual Presentation Skills, which is a 2-day instructor-led course that includes tools and worksheets for reinforcement If you'd like to learn more about this program, just go to communispond.com. You can either check out our solutions page or feel free to fill out the contact us form, ask us any questions, and we're here to answer them for you.
And Jessica, just a quick point of clarification. It's a two-part virtual LED, so it's delivered online on your platform, and it's not 2 days, so it's not like you're sitting in front of your screen for 2 days. But
right,
it is
exactly.
2 parts.
Yes.
So just to make sure that people are clear, and it's a terrific program. Folks really should check it out.
Yeah, thank you. So while you've been chatting, our audience has sent in a number of questions, so let me get started with one that came in earlier. And that question is, how often should you open a polling question for a presentation? For example, an hour presentation, for an hour presentation, how many times should we stop and ask a question?
You know, it depends on the type of presentation. And it's important that we focus on what we're trying to accomplish rather than what tool we're using. So I'll give you an example. This is a webinar. We've got many 3 digits worth of people on this call. And so it's equivalent to standing on a lecture stage, right? There's kind of a presenting and then you take Q&A. It's the nature of the beast. In a small group or in a team meeting, you want as much interaction as possible. And you want to check for that audience engagement. So the fact of the matter is that while it's impossible to give precise moments, I like to break the information into chunks. So give them a chunk of information, and then there's something, either a discussion, a chance to ask questions, a check-in with your audience for understanding, and you break it up into chunks and do it that way. Very similar to the way you would in the classroom. The difference is in the classroom, we're doing it almost constantly with our eyeballs. Online, you need to physically, consciously, intentionally create those breaks and solicit that input. So, you know, how often should you poll? It's really a question, and polling is one of those things that do you need to test for understanding as you go? Right? Do you have long periods where it might make sense to engage the audience? Do you need to assess your audience? You know, what's their experience level? Very often people have mistaken impressions, so it's a good time to put a poll in the middle of your presentation to demonstrate that people maybe don't know as much as they think they do. Here's the thing. You are a professional. You know how to do this in the classroom or in a sales call. You've been doing this for a very long time. When would you check in with them in the real world? When would you ask for a show of hands in the classroom? Build that in. So what you want is frequent interaction. You don't want it to derail your presentation, but you need that feedback and that engagement. So build it in much the same way as you do in a traditional presentation, and you'd be surprised how strong that correlation is.
Great, thank you, Wayne. Another question is in regards to blended training. So this person has people in a training room and then also people joining in via audio and web conference. And so they're having trouble juggling that. So what would you recommend for that situation?
Yeah, those hybrid trainings or hybrid meetings are really difficult. I will tell you that as a facilitator, they are the single hardest thing to do. A couple of things that I would suggest. One is, as a visual in the meeting, I would use the WebEx or whatever virtual meeting screen you're using, because people remotely can still use the chat and raise their hand to say they have a question and things like that. And so it's a way of keeping them engaged, and the people in the meeting room are aware of the existence and contributions of your remote learners. The other thing is a very simple best practice, and it's really hard to get in the habit. Stop going to the people in the room first for feedback and questions. And that's hard to do because we lead with our eyes. We're talking in the room, somebody at the table raises a hand, our instinct is to go there first. The problem is that the people in the room get all of the discussion and all of the attention, and the people who are remote, if they can get a word in edgewise, kind of get treated like second-class citizens. what I've tried to do very consciously is, at least periodically, start by calling on the remote people first so they get the idea you are important, you are included, your contributions are expected, and you're more likely to do that. And the people in the room will be reminded that there are other people out there as well. It is a really difficult thing, and something that what you might want to do is start thinking about delivering especially short trainings or short presentations where everybody's on the web platform so that everybody's on an equal footing. And some companies are just starting to get around to that maybe we don't need to get everybody together in a room in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish.
Thanks, Wayne. And I know we said we would have this webinar go for 45 minutes, so if you need to drop off, I understand. We'll keep going through some more questions that have come in. Another question is, what is the suggested length of time for a live online training session? Sort of touched on that a little bit.
For online training, here's the thing. People's attention spans are physically and literally strained when they're presenting online. Generally speaking, anything more than an hour is asking a lot of your audience. For example, if we go over 90 minutes, we build a break, a physical 5-minute break in the middle of it, because people just can't physically maintain focus on a screen for that long. It largely depends on what you're training and the skills involved. But here's what I would suggest. Just because something is a full day in the classroom does not mean that you can move it online and have it be a full continuous day online. You're going to be much more effective and people appreciate it more if you break it up into smaller chunks over a longer time. That's why, and if it sounded like I was jumping on Jessica, I wanted to make it very clear that the virtual presentation skills program is 2 parts, but it's not like you're sitting there for a full 2 days. Because that is a really hard thing to ask of your audience. And we need to remember that human beings can only maintain focus for so long, and in this online screen-oriented world, our attention spans are becoming shorter. The short answer is hour-long modules, 45-minute modules have been shown to be highly effective. Anything less than a half hour is kind of not worth the trouble of logging on. Anything longer than that is putting a strain on your audience.
Great. And we have somebody that would like to hear a little bit more about clearing. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, the idea of clearing a slide is really pretty simple, and it goes back to Communispond's online or executive presentation skills. But when something new appears on the screen, it's very often the case that the audience immediately starts to figure it out. If you put a spreadsheet up on the screen, and I'm not the presenter, so I can't demonstrate this right now, but if I put a spreadsheet up on the screen, you're going to start looking. You're going to read all the columns. You're going to start reading everything. Certain numbers are going to jump out at you. And while you're doing that, you're not actually listening to the speaker. Whereas if the speaker says, I know you're looking at a lot of information, I direct your attention to line 2, box 5, and they use their annotation tools to visually draw your attention to the relevant information, you're more likely to keep the audience on track. If you just have a visual with lots to look at and you're talking, you can be creating a disconnect between what you're saying and what the audience is seeing. And human beings will always default to what they see over what they hear. So if you've got that really analytical person who's focused on a piece of information that isn't the one you're talking about, you may lose that person at least momentarily. So the idea of clearing is the moment a visual appears on the screen, whether it's screen sharing or a PowerPoint slide or whatever, tell your audience what they're looking at a very high level and then direct them where you want them to look. That's the easiest way to describe it in a nutshell. Thank
you. And another question is, What do you do when you've got a small audience and you're asking questions throughout the training and you're suddenly hearing crickets?
Yeah, so that's always our worst nightmare, right? There's a couple of things that you can do. One of the things that I'm pretty shameless about is at the beginning, you have to set the expectation. We expect participation. I want to hear from everybody. I intentionally get the audience involved pretty quickly up front and pretty consistently throughout the presentation so that, they're engaged, they stay with us, and they understand the expectation. If it suddenly gets real quiet out there, I will actually stop what I'm doing and I'll say, okay, I really need to hear, can you hear me? Are you seeing this? Do you hear me? If they then say, yes, we can hear you, okay, so just as you would in the classroom, are there questions? Is there anything we need to do, or are you okay to move on? You need to be very explicit because you can't tell from looking in their eyes. In the classroom, you can see everybody smiling and nodding, and it's like, okay, good. But you need to be a little assertive about calling for that feedback. And I frequently will call a halt to my presentation just to get an audio from somebody who says, yep, we're listening, we're following, it's all good.
Great, thank you. And another question, do you use multiple headsets if there are multiple presenters?
Absolutely. There is a tendency to, if you've got multiple presenters, we'll have one computer in the room or one speakerphone, and everybody will use that one. And it really impacts the sound quality in a negative way. It's really, you're going to get the best input when everybody has the strongest possible connection. One of the reasons that we're having a few challenges with the audio today is that we're using a totally voice over internet system. We're using WebEx's phone system, and depending where you are, you can be at the mercy of internet traffic, your computer, what's coming out of the WebEx server. So you want to maximize the quality of your input. In a perfect world, even on a web meeting, I like to use a landline phone with a headset because that tends to give us the best audio quality.
Great, thank you. And do you have any best practices to present virtually to individuals that are not tech savvy?
Absolutely. One of the, when you're dealing with an audience that isn't tech savvy, it's really hard to get your message across because they're stressed out. One of the things that we recommend, and this is certainly part of virtual presentation skills, is at the beginning of your presentation, get your audience involved right away. Show them how to raise their hand. Show them how to send a chat message. Once they've become, and this is adult learning theory, once they've become kinesthetically involved, they are going to realize they can't break it, it's not going to hurt them, and they can relax. If they are totally stressed out about the experience, they're not going to be able to really listen and absorb your message anyway. So take a moment at the beginning, help them get comfortable with the online environment just a little bit, and take it from there.
Great. Another question. And thank you to everybody for all your questions that are coming in. These are really, really good questions. Here's another one. What do you do when a discussion starts among the people to whom you are presenting to and they're not getting you involved?
It's funny. That's when it ceases to become a technical virtual presentation problem and it becomes a facilitation issue. If the conversation is in fact relevant and it's good conversation and they're sharing ideas, you do what any good facilitator does, which is step back and monitor to make sure that it's on track, that people are being heard, all of that, and you just direct traffic. If you're having a collaborative meeting, you want those discussions, and you as the leader don't need to do all of it. On the other hand, if it starts getting off track, if it starts to become a distraction, if people can't hear, it is then our job as the facilitator of the session to step in, direct traffic, call on people as individuals, or call them back and say, hey, we're running short on time. We've got other things that we need to do. So allowing the participants to discuss and engage is critical. We also have a responsibility to the overall success of the meeting and the outcome. So it's just a facilitation issue. It's the exact same thing that happens in the classroom, and we've all been there when it dissolves into a discussion. Sometimes that discussion is valuable, you want to let it go. Sometimes it's a distraction, you need to rein it in. That's your job.
Perfect, thank you. And how often should you pause to check for understanding?
How often do you check in for understanding? Again, it depends on the size of the group, right? But I generally, every 4 or 5 minutes in a virtual class, there's some kind of check-in. What questions do you have? How many of you have felt that? Is this making sense? Some kind of check-in, because you can't do it with your eyeballs. And if the chat is active, that people are engaged. If people are using the raise hand button, all of that helps. But I build in intentionally if I've got a 4-minute chunk of information, I will do a check-in after that chunk of information.
Great, thank you. And there are more questions that we haven't been able to address just due to time constraints. So I'll go through and I will put you in touch with Wayne or the appropriate person that can answer those questions for you. If you have more questions that you would like to ask but you haven't yet submitted, you can go to our website, communispond.com, go to Contact Us. That is an open forum for submit your questions, and please submit your questions and we'll get somebody to answer them for you within 24 hours. So with that, we'll conclude our webinar. I will email the winners of 1 free Android tablet and 2 free executive presentation skills gift certificates at the conclusion of the webinar. And Wayne will be reaching out to the winner of the free book, Meet Like You Mean It. And that concludes our webinar. Thank you, Wayne Turmel, for giving us some very valuable insights. I want to thank you all for joining us, and thank you for those great questions. And I hope to see you at our next webinar.